good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is Friday. Happy Friday to those of you tuning in. It is October 20th, 2023. Not a whole lot has changed with Tammy out there in the very western extent of our tropical Atlantic. 10 a.m. this morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, she was officially upgraded to a hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 75 miles an hour in the center. This could be a good thing or a bad thing, however you look at it. Yes, we could potentially see some greater impacts to our Leeward Island nations. However, because it is a little bit more intense than what National Hurricane Center was initially projecting, this could mean we could see a poleward movement a little bit earlier, sparing a large majority of our Lesser Antilles. Today, we're primarily going to do a comprehensive update on everything we have for Hurricane Tammy at this time. There really isn't too much else to do as of this point, as within the next 12 hours, conditions will really go downhill, and we'll be essentially bracing for the full onslaught of what Hurricane Tammy has to offer as we go into the later evening hours of tonight. Right now, we're looking at the radar in Barbados, courtesy of B. McNolly's website here. This is a really wonderful tool to see exactly what we have going on with the center, and you could see that over the last couple of hours, we've seen some really good organization and an eye wall starting to form up as she gets closer and closer to the Lesser Antilles. Since then, you could really see that the storm has slowed down quite a bit, and that does indicate that it is likely to begin that northward trek, as it has been progressively moving to the west over the last several hours, and I do think that now we're starting to see her pump the brakes. We're getting ready to see that northward turn, scraping the eastern extremity of most of our windward and leeward islands. At this point, there really isn't a whole lot of forecasting we can do, and a lot of it is going to be nowcasting and watching all of our live satellite and radar data, as we've been emphasizing over the last few segments with this storm, to really determine exactly where it's going to go. Some of our models still do suggest we could see it fetch a little bit more to the west. A lot of our higher res models do think that it's going to stay just barely to the east of most of our leeward islands, however, maybe taking a direct hit through Antigua and Bermuda, where you'll see the full force of these hurricane force winds. Another pro we have working with us, if you could look on this radar imagery by itself, you can see a lot of the storm is well off to the south and the east of its center, at least in terms of our strongest thunderstorm activity. So the further east we can keep it, the less of an impact we're going to see with our islands. Some of the estimates from National Hurricane Center indicate we could see between 10 to 12 inches of rain. If this holds true, I don't really see that happening. I could definitely see somewhere between the realm of 4 to 6 inches for the areas a lot closer to that center and potentially on the eastern side of the storm, or even on the south side as we have those bands and residual moisture being pulled into the southern periphery of this storm. But as of right now, I think that may be an over forecast just based off of the parameters I've been looking at over the last couple days and what I'm seeing on radar right now, and then referencing the current projected window of movement. Switching on over to the true visible satellite shot. I love using this because it gives us enough of a zoomed out perspective to get an idea of what the environment looks like around this storm and what the overall symmetry of this storm is doing. And as I mentioned this morning, for those of you who don't follow me on Instagram, as soon as I woke up this morning, I noticed that we're really starting to see some good symmetry and some good convective outflow and inflow along the northern side of this storm, which is indicative of strengthening. And lo and behold, as soon as I sent that out, we had an update of a 65 mile an hour intensity change, and then all of a sudden at 10 a.m. we had that 75 mile an hour hurricane classification. The high pressure off to its northeast is no longer playing a significant influence to it. You can see that there is some shear just off to the east of its northernmost quadrant. However, at this point now, we're not seeing too much of that dry air wrapping around the northern apex of this system, which is why it's definitely gotten that more saw blade, that circular type of appearance on satellite imagery, and you could definitely make out what looks to be an eye feature trying to come through that cirrus dense overcast. It's trying to show itself. It hasn't gotten to that point just yet, which is good. It means that we're still seeing gradual intensification as opposed to any kind of explosive development with this system. The satellite paints a very good picture of what we're anticipating. If this system can track just to the east of our islands, a lot of you guys out there are not going to realize the full extent of this storm. A lot of the strongest winds are going to remain off to the north and the eastern side of it. I'll take you over to windy.com in a second to show you exactly where the strongest core of winds is currently, but you can see that there is still some really good inflow and wraparound moisture on the southern base of this system. So your windward island locations are definitely going to see some increased convective activity, as well as the feeder bands as we go into the later afternoon hours of today and overnight tomorrow into Saturday morning. Here's our current track guidance directly from National Hurricane Center. We're using their actual interactive map so we can get a close-up view of all of our islands and the current watches, warnings, and advisories we have issued. You can see an abundance of hurricane warnings now currently in effect, as well as tropical storm warnings, with a couple of other areas of tropical storm watches spreading further down into our windward islands just because of how expansive this storm is trying to get. You can see a majority of the winds are still to the east and the northern flanks of Tammy right now. If it continues on this current course and this track holds true, the only areas that will unfortunately be hit very hard are going to be Antigua and Bermuda. Everyone else is going to see probably tropical storm level intensity, as well as tropical storm conditions conditions within the most organized convective bands that will work their way through your area. As it stands currently, Antigua and Barbuda could see a landfall, just like we saw with Tropical Storm Philippe about 2 weeks ago. We can't rule out the possibility of seeing some hurricane-level gusts for Guadeloupe as that eye wall tries to track just to your east, if not directly overhead, depending on how much of a wiggle and wobble we get from that center of circulation. We also still have the tropical storm warning in effect for Dominica at this time, with the tropical storm watch in effect for Martinique. If this storm does wobble a little bit more to the west, despite what we're seeing currently on satellite and radar, I would anticipate that they're going to have to upgrade that watch very quickly to get ahead of this system despite its very slow progress. National Hurricane Center is predicting we will see a little bit more intensification before this system can get close enough to play a substantial role in everyone's weather out there. As of 8 p.m. tonight, we could see 80-mile-an-hour winds in the center with gusts well into the Category 2 range of 100 miles an hour, and then as it approaches Guadeloupe and the potential landfall for Antigua and Barbuda, it looks like we could definitely be gusting into Category 2 level intensity, especially in your strongest feeder bands, with sustained winds of 85 miles an hour in the center. Now, I want to emphasize for those of you watching today, please don't take that wind field diagram on this chart as the end-all be-all. This is going to change, and we have a very dynamic system like with every tropical cyclone out there. These wind diagrams are only to the best of their ability showing where the average extent of this wind field extends. So don't be surprised if we see a little bit of a bleeding over a tropical storm force winds along the western side of this system as it continues to deepen and further increase its symmetry as it approaches the islands, and it wouldn't be surprising to see that hurricane force wind field expand if this does deepen a couple more millibars and increase from our current 75-mile-an-hour status to 85 miles an hour. You also can't rule out those higher level wind gusts within those convective complexes moving through your area and inside the feeder bands. These are also likely to increase wind speeds at the surface and dump very heavy rainfall in a very short period of time that will definitely help to aid in increasing your floodwater conditions. With the current forecast track, it looks like Sunday morning is still the deadline for the worst conditions to finally begin to taper off, and we'll only continue to see feeder banding along the southern apex of this system, as well as any kind of residual moisture that's getting pulled in from that inflow along the south side of it. That's going to keep rain chances fairly elevated at least for another 12 to 18 hours after the storm can get up to the north. What happens from there is really going to be critical. We need to watch closely exactly what happens when this emerges in the Atlantic and gets out of the eastern Caribbean, because some of the high-res models and a few of our other long-range models want to do some interesting trends and interesting paths with this system once it does get across our islands and away to the north. Before we get into all that, we're going to take a quick glance at windy.com. As you can see, here is our center of circulation, and the strongest core of not only tropical storm but hurricane force winds is off to the north and the northeast. That right front quadrant is becoming very apparent. So looking at the current structure of this storm, if we do see a little bit of additional intensification, this wind field will likely expand, especially if we do get that core eye wall forming up. We'll see the strongest winds rotating directly around the center, but along with the strongest impacts, especially the sustained impacts, are going to stay to the east, at least as it currently stands. I don't think we're going to see this system completely achieve full symmetry all the way around in all coordinated quadrants of the system itself, but we can definitely continue to watch it. As I mentioned, we're into nowcast criteria. We've breached zero barrier, and it looks like things are going to continue to go downhill as we go through the back end of this afternoon, early evening hours, and again, that fateful midnight hour going into Saturday morning is when the worst will be upon you guys. Now, we're going to look at our halves A and B models particularly. We haven't done too much of this on the Weather Channel for a little bit now, but I want to show you a close-up view of what our high-res models are thinking, because not only in terms of what we're seeing currently do things get a little bit sporty out there for our leeward islands, but as soon as this system propagates to your north, that nor'easter currently moving through the northeastern portions of the United States and the low cyclogenicizing and the low forming up off of our mid-Atlantic states to help further instigate some cold air advection and deepening of our trough in the upper levels over eastern CONUS, does some very wonky things with our storm, at least according to some of our long-range predictions. You track this through time, and the halves A is anticipating a direct hit to Antigua and Barbuda, and it looks like we could possibly see some impacts into Guadeloupe as well as St. Kitts and Nevis. So we're going to have to pay close attention to how far to the west this jogs. It looks like between the hours of 12 Zulu and 18 Zulu tomorrow, Saturday, so between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., the system could try to track a little bit further to the west and give you guys a direct hit up there to those islands I just previously mentioned. After that, as it continues to track to the north, you can see it tries to slow its progress even further before almost retrograding up against that very potent high pressure that sits along the eastern periphery of the United States. It almost looks like our halves A and B models actually want this to become absorbed with that cold pocket we've been discussing for the last couple of days. When we transitioned over to the halves B model, I'll show you the upper level vorticity, and you can see clear indications of that bubble of cold air coming down and interacting with Tammy specifically. Here we are in the HAFS-B parent model. This is the far out view. As you can see, we have that vorticity associated with Tammy. This model is also indicating that Antigua and Barbuda could take a direct landfall from this system anywhere between, it looks like 21Z on Saturday to 0Z on Saturday going into Sunday, which could definitely be an 8 to 9 p.m. landfall for you guys, especially if this continues to slow down. As this tracks to the north, you can see the vorticity clearly consolidated to her center of circulation, but then if you watch off the coast of the United States, I know you can only see so much from this AOI view, but you'll see some breakaway vorticity come down in association with that cold pocket and begin to wrap up Tammy towards the very tail end of this loop, which could be indications that we could see a little bit of sporadicness in her forward progress once she gets to the north of our Caribbean islands. Switching over to the Icon. Well, Icon has been one of the better performing models with this system since day one. As you can see, we are expecting very similar impacts in representation of what we saw in our HAVS A and B models. We're looking at maybe sustaining some direct hits to most of our leeward island nations according to the 12Z run. Doesn't seem like we're going to see much more in the sense of dramatic intensification from this system. It's going to try to hold its current intensity as it scrapes through our leeward islands to its entirety, and then once it gets to the north, you see it butt up against that high pressure, slow down, retrograde to the east ever so slightly, and then begin to pull northward with the jet, and an influence with that cold pocket. You can see the cyclonic wind field around her really begins to increase, and then what's very concerning about this model in particular is it swings it back to the west, directly towards Bermuda as a full-fledged hurricane. So Bermuda, I'm not projecting that this is exactly going to come towards your way. I'm not suggesting that this is something that we really need to start preparing for, but the fact that the Icon has been leaning in this very weird fashion, having it go back and forth, kind of zigzagging through the central Atlantic, leads me to believe that we need to start putting some alerts out there for you guys to at least monitor this. Keep an eye out what's coming from the south headed in your general direction. A general consensus with most of our other model guidance thinks that it will ride that frontal system in that jet axis out directly into sea, posing no harm or foul to Bermuda, but the Icon again has been one of the more accurate models with this system ever since it came off of Africa almost 2 weeks back at this point. So the only reason I want to emphasize that for my viewers out there in Bermuda, we should at least keep one eye out on the horizon for what's coming out of the Caribbean headed your general direction, at least initially, is because of what the Icon has been trending over the last 24, 48 hours, because it has been suggesting a slowing as well as some weird retrograding fashion in its path before finally ejecting off to the north, and it could definitely head towards Bermuda if the conditions are right. So Bermuda, we still have quite a ways away. This is October 28th at this point. We're getting to the back end of the month. It's only October 20th at this time, so we still have plenty of time to continue to monitor exactly what the steering currents look like, as well as what this system decides to do once it's finished impacting the Lesser Antilles. And then last but not least, before we go on to anything else, I want to save majority of talking about the entire North Atlantic and North America for that matter for our tropics talk tonight at 8 p.m. We're going to simply close out the video looking at our 0Z Euro probabilities, because there are a few other models, the GFS, the Canadian, and the Icon, as well as the Korean model, that are highlighting different circulations that may try to take shape either to the north of the Greater Antilles of Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, or in the Southern Caribbean, where their other area of interest is currently highlighted. As you go through time, 120 hours out, 144 hours out, you could see great agreement that we could see something in the realm of a tropical depression try to form up from our other area of interest, currently highlighted at 20% according to National Hurricane Center, before moving into Central America and becoming nothing more than a remnant low before maybe trying to re-intensify as it gets out over the Eastern Pacific. Once you get towards the back end of the run, you could see another round of potential probabilities forming up in the Southern Caribbean, as well as with the two very aggressive tropical waves we have out there in the main development region. As you get towards 240 hours, 264, and then 288, you could see that we have at least 25 to almost 35% agreement that the Euro is thinking that there is an instance of tropical depression formation likely as we get towards the very tail end of this month and start rolling into November. This is quite a ways out. That's why I don't want to put too much emphasis on it in this video, guys. This is more so for the sake of Hurricane Tammy and keeping viewers ahead of the curve in terms of what she's doing out there. But there definitely are still some very subtle areas of interest we want to keep an eye out there, not only in the tropical Atlantic, but in the Caribbean Sea. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the video segment, guys. Thank you very much for joining me on this wonderful Friday afternoon. For those of you out there in the Lesser Antilles, we are praying and sending you all the positive energy that we can. We're working very hard behind the scenes to keep you updated as best as we can alongside the National Hurricane Center. But again, as we mentioned in my video yesterday, you want to make sure to watch radar and satellite very closely so you can get a better idea in between these full-fledged video segments of what it is that you have coming your way as Tammy makes her final approach and potential landfall to our leeward islands. Tonight, we're going to do a play-by-play with Hurricane Tammy and kind of get a better analysis of what's going on as of 8 p.m., 9 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll go over all the very finite details and do a little bit of live data reconnaissance, looking at our satellite and radar and what the current conditions look like out there as she makes her approach to a potential landfall. We'll also explore a little bit of those areas of interest that I mentioned in the Caribbean, that 20% highlighted by National Hurricane Center, and the couple of tropical waves that are out there moving through the main development region right now that look to be holding their convection pretty good, so we may want to investigate those as they get closer to our areas currently being impacted by Hurricane Tammy. I hope everything has been great for you guys. I hope you had a wonderful week, and I hope you can start the weekend off on a high note, regardless of where you are, regardless of the weather conditions in your area. Remember to stay positive, stay powerful, and always stay ahead of the weather. Thank you again for tuning in. We'll see you tonight at our 8 p.m. Tropics Talk, but until then, this is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.